Hey, and welcome to the Reset Podcast. Everything you need to know that your therapist probably never told you. Researched by experts, real-life experiences. This is Reset. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Reset Podcast.
We are so glad you are here. And today we're going to kind of continue a subject matter that we started a couple podcasts ago. We said, hey, you know what? We probably should spend some time on this. And people actually contacted us and said, yes, can you please talk more about sometimes like why do you get diagnosed, why not diagnosed, and kind of go and talk about more about therapy a little bit more. And so guess what? We're going to do it. And I was thinking to myself, like, where do we start with this? And I was thinking in terms of even when I teach this and at the university I teach at is, okay, what is important for us to know, especially if you want to be a future therapist or psychologist of America. And I was thinking about, okay, what is a psychological disorder? You know, I think a lot of times in pop psychology, we talk a lot about this. And I think just for us to have a definition for today, a psychological disorder is the pattern of thoughts, feelings, or actions, behaviors, right, that are deviant, distressful, and dysfunctional. And the key here is the word disorder, because disorder really refers to a state of either a mental or let's say a behavioral health that is ill, meaning it's just unhealthy. In many ways, it goes against what the norm is. And today, we would consider to be what is normal or what is the norm. And so it's either a thought in the mind, right, a sense of a psyche, or behaviors that goes against what is considered to be order in our culture.
Atypical.
Yeah, atypical. Or, you know, think about order in this, and that's what we call it. It's a disorder. And the key part about, let's say, diagnosing is we're looking at patterns. We're trying to find patterns to find a collection of symptoms that go together. And it's not just seeing a single symptom. You can't just have, like, a diagnosis doesn't have like one symptom. You had to have a variety of symptoms. You have to have a collection of symptoms that we say, hey, when this occurs, when these 6, these 7, these 8 occur, this is the diagnosis that we're looking at. And with those symptoms, you got to think about is there distress and dysfunction in their lives? I mean, you can have certain symptoms that can go along with a certain psychological disorder, but for some people, it might not create any distress. No distress in relationships or at work or with education, whatever it may be. But what we're looking for is, with these symptoms, is there distress and dysfunction that's sufficiently severe enough to interfere with their daily life and well-being? And so when we see that, now we're seeing some deviancy from the norm. This is when we're starting to see, okay, there's a disorder that is occurring. And so then at that point, we diagnose.
And it's also an amount of time that is happening, correct?
Yeah, usually like 6 months or more. So if it's less than 6 months, then it'd be like, let's say, acute. If it's more than 6 months, then it'll be considered chronic. And so more days than not for the 6 months. So depending on the diagnosis, you know, there is a time aspect to it. So like you could go through depression or have a season of depression, but never be diagnosed with major depression just because you just haven't had it long enough, or, you know, maybe
situational.
Yeah, situational. Let's say you kind of went through a breakup and, you know, kind of a sad 2 weeks that you went through. We didn't consider that then major depression at all. If anything, it might be just be like an adjustment disorder with depression, or, you know, adjusting through something that is just like I said, situational or maybe even environmental. Like, let's say you're going through a new job and you're kind of grieving the old one, and the new one's kind of causing some stress. But we wouldn't consider that to be general anxiety disorder or anything like that. So then, you know, the question we get a lot too is, why do we diagnose? Like, what's the point of it? And I think that's when we get to look at, okay, so we have this diagnosis Bible called the DSM. And with the DSM, it's worldwide. So the key part is we all have the same language as professionals. So if that's social workers, if it's psychologists, if it's therapists, if it's licensed professional counselor, that we all have these, or psychiatrists as well, that we all have the same aspect of the same language. Yeah, the same lingo. So here is some, I would say, the major 3 reasons why people choose to diagnose clients do it. I mean, the first one is that diagnosis creates a shorthand, like a verbal shorthand referring to lists of associated symptoms. So instead of just like listing, let's say I'm talking to a psychiatrist of one of my clients and they're talking to me, it's like, okay, what's going on with the client? Instead of me listing like every single symptom, I could just say, we have major depression, reoccurrent, and they know just based on, those 3 or 4 words, what is going on with the client. Or if I could say if it's general anxiety disorder with panic attacks, that just kind of clarifies it. I don't need to go through, client feels like they're going to faint. They feel like they have sweaty hands. They wake up with anxiety. They go to bed with it. They can't fall asleep. It just creates a verbal shorthand, which is easier for us as a professional to really to speak into or to speak to each other when it comes to it. The second reason I really think is that diagnosis allows us to statistically to actually study a group of symptoms. And so one reason we have the aspect of diagnosis is that it gives us opportunity to do psychological studies, is to group people, pin certain variables that combine together, pin these symptoms together, and let's study and figure out what can we do treatment-wise, if it's medication, and actually do a study with them. And so in many ways, it allows us to put people together who have similar symptoms, and we're able to then figure out and help create different treatment plans around them, do a study around it. And I would say the third thing is that the diagnosis can guide really treatment choices. And so, which goes to the second one. When we have a diagnosis and someone meets a diagnosis, that allows us now to create a treatment plan. And so you're taught treatment plans in graduate school and clinical program. And the treatment plans have been studied, has been researched to say, okay, this is the best for this issue. Cognitive behavioral therapy will be good for, let's say, if it's going to be the aspect of depression or anxiety, where it may be this person has trauma, so now we're going to use EMDR therapy, be a good treatment plan for them. And so it allows us to actually narrow down, so, okay, what is, based on our research, is best treatment plan, treatment goals even, for this client based on the diagnosis that they have and how we go about it, including it could even be about time. How long does it take for this treatment plan to be played out? Usually, obviously different for everyone else, but kind of gives us a mindset of around like, okay, we've seen this before. This is what we usually do for these type of situations. This is how you should play out. But nothing's always concrete because everything's always, with different clients and different people. The byproduct of that is, there could be confounding variables in any situation.
So you use like the main idea for healing and then you individualize it per client.
100%. And then you get into the client's aspect of the client goal is like, what does healthy look like for you? What does happy look like for you? What does a healthy relationship with so-and-so look like? And so you got to get their input when it comes to that. But when it comes to like case conceptualization, the aspect of actually writing out as the clinician what you really want to start doing, then that's when you kind of start working that in and start approaching therapy around that. Does the client necessarily know? No, they don't. Should they know? Sometimes. Should they not know? Sometimes. Sometimes it's for us, a lot of times for us as the professional, to make sure we stay within this direction and pathway that we're trying to help achieve for our client, which is like their clinical goals, but also maintain understanding of what symptoms we want to relieve to get the client away from that diagnosis or to be undiagnosed with that.
I know you had said once, which I thought was really interesting and fascinating, that you don't diagnose your clients in front of them most of the time because unless it's something maybe like you had just said, they need to know and that it would actually benefit them. Sometimes people will hold on to their diagnosis as their identity and a label and not be able to move on past forward with it. They will then use it as a crutch and an excuse and not be able to work through it. So you don't actually say to your client, you are diagnosed with da 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 da, or like, you'll use those words like, I see that this is making you anxious and that kind of stuff, but to not diagnose them unless like, your client will actually see that and be like, okay, I'm going to push through this. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think there's a rarity where I actually sit down with my client and say, this is your diagnosis. I take out the DSM, I walk them through it. Those cases usually happen when I feel like someone's in denial of their mental health, or they're just in denial of what they're going through. And I had to wake them up, and somebody would say, hey, you're officially diagnosed with this. And let's just take out the DSM and go through this real quick. And that kind of gets in the understanding of I got to take my mental health seriously. I need to lean into this. But you are right. There is this, I would say the last 5-6 years, there's this cautious tale where clients will come in wanting a diagnosis and then wanting to use it in all the wrong ways, to make excuses, to have responsibility in life, to not take ownership in certain things in life. And what we're also seeing is the aspect of they're just over-identifying with the diagnosis, or that becomes their symptom, their issue, their personality, and they hold on to that. It's kind of like I think about, some people, I think about verbiage is so important. Say I'm depressed, and in my mind, think, okay, who am I? My name is Joe, and I'm currently dealing with depression. It's totally different than, hey, my name is Joe, and I am depressed. I think the I am depressed becomes so much of my personality type, becomes so much of who I am, my identity.
It becomes how you filtrate everything.
And I just think there's a different mindset when you say, hi, my name is Joe, and I'm currently dealing with depression. I think it's the aspect in which it kind of helps out with, maintaining some sense of, I can conquer this or care for this, or I can use certain things to maintain a sense of health over it. And I think too many people, when they get that diagnosis, that becomes their I am statement. And that could be dangerous, especially if we're wanting to recycle pain over and over again and not move forward or progress.
And I think that's really good for a lot of us to remember, because the reason I started therapy was I was starting to recognize, wow, not everybody feels like this. I didn't start therapy for my therapist to tell me and confirm and affirm that I struggle with anxiety and depression. I already knew something's off, something's wrong. I started therapy to get help, not to be affirmed that I have this label. Like, you shouldn't be starting therapy to have someone confirm that you are anxious and depressed. If you're feeling enough of a struggle daily that you need to talk to somebody, that's enough to talk to somebody. And so I think that's where like you were saying, is a lot of people, especially because the stigma is getting removed, which is awesome. But then I think a lot of people are just wanting that affirmation that, oh, this is what's wrong with me. See, I told you. Instead of, okay, this is what's wrong with me. Let me get better. Let me get help.
This is the part of our show where we talk about our opinions on the things that we observe. Observe and then respond, don't worry, you cannot be wrong. It's all about the way that your mind works. Observation feedback.
So we officially observed our neighborhood becoming what I call electric dependent on our kids and their toys. And by that, I mean we officially now have electric scooters, electric bikes, and now even the electric skateboard has joined in. And this is something that we kind of fought for a little while with our kiddos, is not getting anything electric. We're kind of what our kids would say old school when it comes to wheels and having fun. But when the guy came with the electric skateboard, and I quote him, it goes 27 miles per hour and has a brake, and he goes around the whole neighborhood and never breaks a sweat, our kid's like, I need one. But we didn't get in the skateboard. We got in the scooter.
It's because he's a good skateboarder. He doesn't need an electric skateboard.
And that's what I was trying to tell him. I'm like, bud, you're kind of from like skateboard central in the world. And so since you're from there, I'm pretty sure you need to keep your California roots there and make sure that, wear your Vans and have fun out there and ride the skateboard. But I'm not going to lie. It is kind of interesting to watch. It actually took our friend who came over the other night to look at all the kids in the front yard. He's like, dude, no one's tired. Everyone's just riding around and they're all, smiling and happy. He's like, if I was doing that back in the day, I would be exhausted going up and down that hill because of all the work it takes to make it happen.
It's true. We did have to pedal up crazy hills and all the things. And it makes me wonder, what is this going to do to our children's generation? Do you feel like it's going to affect them?
Well, I think what it is, and we heard it from our son, is he gets bored easily. And then the other kids get bored easily. it's not like by the way, the batteries don't stop, because when we were around, anything that was battery operated, probably like 15 minutes max, and they had to, recharge it for about 2 days. These kids, they could go on forever, and yet we hear what, especially from even our own son, I am bored. I don't want to ride this anymore. And this is where I started thinking, is it reminds me of the research in Mexico, where that there was this, I don't know, like this Mayans like temple, basically, where it took about a 6-hour hike for tourists to get to the guy that took them there. And the tourists just loved it. They took pictures. They respected the area. They kept it clean. But Mexico's like, we want more people to get to this thing, so they can have more people, more money to spend to get to it. So they actually drilled through the mountain and made it like a 45-minute hike to an hour, not 6 hours. So they get more people in there, in and out. Here's what they found out, is the moment they did that, making it easier to get to this temple, that the people, honestly, didn't really found a wow factor with it, that they disrespected in terms of going on and taking pictures, like standing on the steps. They left trash behind. And what they found out was, when it took the people 6 hours to do it, kind of the sense of adversity to get to this place, people were wowed, because it was the pain and the sweat to get there. They actually appreciated it more. They had better stewardship towards what they're looking at, versus when it took the people 45 minutes to an hour, is they really didn't care about it, didn't respect it. And like I said, they would leave trash behind, and in many ways, they were a poor steward of what they're looking at. And I think that's what's kind of happening with our kids, where we grew up having this adversity going up and down the hill, that we had to go back up, climb back over their skateboards to then go back down. But we enjoyed it because of the kind of like that slight sacrifice to get where we want to get to then have the fun. Eliminated a lot of the boredom, and we actually enjoyed the downhill a lot better. And our kids who don't have that part of it with these electric fill in the blank, is they really get bored. It's all the sweet without the sour.
When everything's just so fast and quick gratification that it doesn't take up as much of their time and day. So what we probably took doing a couple hours, they do in like 30 minutes.
That's totally true. Actually, I didn't think about that. They have way more rounds going up and down the hill, or going down the hill, than we did. So much more quicker. You're probably right. That's what it is. And the crazy part too is, we would take a lot of like water breaks because we get thirsty. There's no water breaks for these kids. And if they actually want a water break, they actually probably, what they want? They want the Fiji water, not the hose water.
Oh my gosh. Can you imagine? Mom, can I please have some Fiji, not the hose?
Yes, I don't want the hose.
Anyway, I do think it's something for us to think about with, it's okay. Like let our kids have an electric scooter or whatnot. But like we remind our kids, you still got to ride your bike. You still got to ride your skateboard. You can't just only do the electric things.
We're trying to teach them that old school still is necessary, especially for just having fun.
Well, and development to some point.
Yes. Or just development of their relationship with boredom, and recognizing sometimes there is the beauty in the adversity of walking up that hill to go back down it. And it may take you 2 minutes to go up and 30 minutes to go down. But it's kind of how it is. Does that make sense?
I think it's the opposite.
It may take you 2 minutes to go up the hill, but 30 seconds to go down.
Yeah, not minutes. You said 30 minutes.
Well, back then it might have been 30 minutes. You don't know the hill that I had to go
but
down or climb.
It only took you 2 minutes to get up there.
Big strides I had. Big strides.
Anyway, let us know if you relate to the electric new phenomenon in the world.
Now back to the show.
It's really hard to get diagnosed. I mean, it really is, for criteria-wise. The other side of that is, and it's going to sound odd, it's also very easy to diagnose someone. So when people are like, I can't believe they diagnosed me in 5 to 10 minutes. Well, it doesn't take much to do that. It could take a simple just questionnaire where the symptoms just automatically add up to then a disorder or a diagnosis. Or just like a clinical interview, which you're trained to do that multiple times. I mean, working in the psych ward, doing a social psych interview, within the first 5-10 minutes, we figure out the diagnosis is just based on the interview process and the paperwork that goes along with that we had to fill out. And so When it's there, it's there. And it's really easy to diagnose. When it's not there, it's not there. And we're not going to make something that's not there. And so that's the key. And I always also say is, and this is true too, especially I would say in the 80s and 90s, where a lot of diagnosing occurred, it was mandatory because of insurance. And we had to diagnose to get insurance. And that's it's a loaded subject matter, but insurances don't cover for all diagnosis. And so then you're taught in many ways, especially in your clinical practicums, and that you have a handful of diagnoses that you have to diagnose your client with for allow the insurance to cover their needs. So like when I was working in an inpatient or working with in a psych ward is, okay, here's the diagnosis the insurance will cover, and some diagnoses they just will not cover. Luckily, when you work in such severe levels that they easily can fit in those diagnoses. But a lot of my colleagues have this struggle in prior practice if they take insurance, which I don't.
I was just going to say, is that one reason you don't?
Yeah. Is that they have to put the client in certain box for a treatment plan, certain box when it comes to diagnosis for the insurance to actually cover it. And that's the part that's hard. So insurance then, in many ways, dictates a lot of what we've done in the last 30 years, including, used to be a clinical hour was 60 minutes, and then a clinical hour turned to 50 minutes. So you have a 50-minute clinical hour, which is so wild to think about. Then now they changed it to 45 minutes. And so you have a 45-minute clinical hour, which I always think is funny because like 45-minute clinical hour is kind of like a distortion of reality. And here we are trying to help clients to not have a distortion of reality. And it gets confusing. But with that said is insurance plays a big part of diagnosing. And that's the main reasons why I think I look back at my clinical program, we're taught a lot about it. And one thing's for the treatment plan of it. The other part of it is the aspect of just understanding how insurances work to help get the client get reimbursement and for us to do that. Now, I say that, but there's a reason for that as well, which was in the 80s and early 90s, the history of my profession is that they really used and abused insurance. And people would bill for sessions that never occurred, and psychologists and therapists were getting paid a ton of money. And they're just billing, and the sessions never happened. They never occurred. And so insurance just came back and said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. And in many ways, they said, we're going to have more restraints when it comes to we guys are able to bill and how to bill and what to bill for, which is sad because now more than ever, we need it. We need mental health. And the reality of it, guys, is insurance doesn't cover a lot at all. And so that's why most people go rogue and don't do insurance, is not only because of the whole diagnosis thing, but also the aspect in which they want to get paid for their time, because therapy is not easy to do.
Right. And it actually sounds more ethical to me in some regards too, of not having to figure out some kind of diagnosis so the insurance covers it. I can meet my client exactly where they're at and don't have to feel like I need to figure out.
Well, right. You can't diagnose. So you cannot bill insurance without a diagnosis. And there's
because you have to use codes and stuff, right?
100%. Yeah. So I would say probably 95% of my clients don't have a diagnosis. So to give them a diagnosis for me to bill for insurance, I would have to create something. Now, technically, we could probably say in so many ways for a lot of us, like adjustment disorder. Everyone's going through some type of adjustment in life. That'd probably be like the safest. And in many ways, we're kind of taught and trained, like, a lot of ways adjustment disorders, but a lot of people are going through, adjusting through COVID or what it may be. But that's the thing, right? It's like, what do you do with that?
It's kind of an interesting thing to peek behind the curtain and learn about you, psychologists, therapists, behind the scenes.
Well, right. And then also the fact is that my colleagues would take insurance. So that's the biggest thing they complain about is how insurances are asking for things that just don't align or go with what we're taught in clinical program. And here we are trying to fight for the client, do what's best for the client. And a lot of times they want to do what they call brief psychodynamic therapy, which is like Kaiser does
quick.
this. Yeah, do fast and quick. Well, that just doesn't happen in changing neuromapping, doesn't happen when it comes to changing neurons in the brain. It just doesn't happen that way. but they want everything brief. We hope and wish it could be brief.
Because we live in a fast-paced world, baby.
That is true. That is true. So let's talk about the other side of this, which is we brought this up a couple podcasts ago, which is I talked about how my professor in my clinical program, after teaching us psychopathology and learning how to diagnose, at the end did the surprise, I don't believe in diagnosing clients. Even though he taught us about diagnosis and how it works and that kind of stuff. And I was thinking of looking back at my notes. And here's what my notes said from that class and his reasons behind it. Here's his critiques for diagnosing and why there's several of us in our profession that don't believe in diagnosing. First of all, this DSM calls too many people disordered, meaning there's a lot of diagnosis in there and there's a lot of disorders in there. And is that necessarily good or bad? Is that actually positive? Also, could people just be going through some growing pains, some growth spurts, quote unquote, in life, and during that time, meaning that there can be considered having a disorder diagnosis because it'll last longer than 6 months to a year. It's kind of like you look at bipolar with kids. So we used to be able to diagnose adolescents with bipolar, give them bipolar medicine, things like that. Well, that stopped about 5, 6, 7 years ago. We got rid of bipolar for kids. You have to be 18 years and older. I think it's called mood dysregulation disorder. Oh my gosh, I need to know this. Mood dysregulation disorder. I think that's what it's called now. But we don't call them bipolar. Well, why is that? Well, one reason was because some teenagers just act very bipolar in life and very polarizing.
Going through a lot of changes.
Hormone issues and things like that. And so how about we just sit back and wait and see what happens? I was thinking about when I worked for the county and I worked with foster kids and group home kids that go in and out of permanencies, 14, 15 different homes by age 12. Well, when you don't have a permanency, like where you stay and live, that really creates a disruption of your life, of your emotional and mental immune system. And so the amount of kids that were on mood stabilizers, I mean, really there wasn't, I don't remember any of my kids I worked with in those years that was not on medication or that had a psychiatrist on the team, which is funny because on my whiteboard in my office, I put this quote, which is just really, I said it, no one else, which is family is the greatest medicine for kids, because these kids are missing one thing in their life, which is family.
It's so heartbreaking.
And so we inserted medication, but the kids, I look back to them, the kids that had diagnosis of bipolar because they were acting out tremendous ways that look like, let's say, a manic episode. Really what it was is they just needed love. They needed permanency, physical permanency where they live, emotional permanency, someone loving them, caring for them. And so, because of that, sometimes we can just diagnose someone and it could just be really the aspect of give them a couple of years. Let's see what happens with their development and see what occurs with it. The second reason I think why people critique diagnosing is the border between diagnosis or disorder and when it's normal seems arbitrary. It's just very blurred. And kind of like the aspect in which that is that as a person discusses and talks about their life, for them, that could be something that's very heavy. For other people, might not be so heavy. And so if it's the same symptom, one feels it different than the other, can that go under the category of a symptom for a diagnosis or not? So it kind of gets kind of blurred in that area. And it kind of gets really, up to us as the professional to decide whether or not if that is a disorder or not, which is also another critique about it, which is me as the diagnosing person, clinician here, is, what happens if I'm having a really bad day? I just start projecting certain thoughts and emotions onto my client based on what they're saying, right? Countertransference issues, as we call it. And I start diagnosing them based on the projection. Or let's just say my own emotional and mental immune system is weak, and I start creating some very poor value judgments on the client when it comes to their depression or things like that. I guess what great way to put it is if I'm having a really hard time in life per se, and I don't have my mental...
As a therapist.
Yeah, as a therapist, and my mental, emotional immune system is weak. I'm going to work, and people who have, let's say, a slight depression, I could be projecting my depression, my love of how I feel, my relationship with depression onto them. The byproduct of it is I could be diagnosing them with major depression just because I'm not seeing clearly and I'm not hearing them clearly because there's a projection or countertransference issues that are getting that way. Can that happen? Absolutely. I mean, we have bad days. Everyone has bad days. Everyone goes through seasons of depression, anxiety, including us. And so if you don't have that checked, can that cause issues? And the answer is yes. The last critique I would think is this, is that diagnostic labels direct how we view and interpret the world, telling us which behavior and mental state to see as a disorder, meaning that in many ways, diagnosing can hurt us in how we view ourselves and how we view the world. And so it's like it's like having scratched lenses on your glasses. And so some people, when you diagnose them, they see themselves as extremely flawed, and they take that on, and that becomes their identity. And in their mind, they feel like they can't get out of it, and they don't know how to handle that or how to relate to that. And so because of that, a lot of people are professionals who prefer not to. And they like to talk in terms of symptoms, in terms of current state versus absolute. They like to talk in terms of environmental, situational, maybe relational problems versus this is going to be a state for a lifetime, which we discussed before. This is more of a science of caring than curing for sure, right? But taking it in terms of what's going on currently, what's happening now.
I know for me personally, when I was diagnosed with ADHD later on in life, I actually felt so good in the respect of it made sense of why things were so difficult for me. So for me, that diagnosis actually freed me and gave me the grace I always needed. And I've said this a lot, is a diagnosis is not a justification, but it's an explanation. And that has helped me through my life. So I have really tried to take off those glasses that are scratched, put on the clear ones, but know when I start seeing the scratch appear, stopping, telling myself, nope, we're going to fight against this. We are not going to be this, Or when I mess up severely because of, let's say, the way my brain works being ADHD, I stop, pause, give myself grace, forgive myself, move on, apologize to whoever I need to apologize, and I move forward. I think that's the biggest thing when you do have a diagnosis or you are weathering that, is to see it as, I don't know if this is the right way to think of it. This is the way my brain thinks, is you're my enemy, meaning I'm going to fight against you constantly. You are not the good guy. The good guy is all of my coping skills I've learned to punch you in the face. So that's how I see it. And I don't know if it's just because I'm a theater person and I like to see life in good guys and bad guys. And so I'm like, you know what? No, my diagnosis will never, ever be my label or claim over me. I'm going to punch it in the face, but it does explain a lot of my behaviors to then reevaluate, like, whoa, that's why I did that. Okay, let's see how I could have done it better. So I know for some people, maybe that has helped you and freed you to be like, oh my gosh, that's why this has been so hard, because I'm going through this or because I do struggle with this. But I do think we can, unless you think that way, you can take that diagnosis and just not live life to the fullest. Feel like you're a failure. Feel like there's so many things wrong with you because you are this, that, or the other. So there's this important line you have to, or balance of, okay, this might be something I am diagnosed with, but it will never be who I am.
And that's a good point too, where you get in these categories, or we call axes of diagnosis, where there's some aspects of understanding diagnosis is very freeing. And so we would say for sure the category of learning disabilities, dyslexia, ADHD, or sensory issues, where that is very important. And at times for a lot of clients, they get this aha moment of like, this makes sense. Bobby doesn't even study and he gets these great grades. I study all the time. I only get C's. What is going on there? And so when they get these certain diagnoses, it's actually a couple of things happen. I think it gives them, especially for you, like an understanding of like, and that makes sense of my childhood experience in school. Also gives them an understanding of, okay, so there is something there biologically or physiologically. What do I do with it now? And what is the game plan? And I got to take it seriously. It's kind of like I tell a lot of my clients is, especially once I give a diagnosis to, is you have to start recognizing to see this as like diabetes. So, you check diabetes, 2, 3, 4 times, depending on what's going on as a diabetic. But you kind of have to check yourself there mentally and emotionally and kind of give these moments of, okay, where am I at? What do I need to do? Do I need to feed myself to feel better right now? Like literally feed my physical appetite? Do I need to go work out? Do I need to get creative? Or am I actually feeling really good right now? And so I'm going to keep maintaining what I'm doing right now and continue to work hard or whatever, if it's at work or if it's at school or it may be, but kind of just get these check-ins, these mental or even reality checks throughout the day when it comes to that, just like you would do with diabetes. And that's why you are right. There is certain diagnoses that I think are very freeing for clients to hear. I just think that there's that spectrum once again where you get certain clients come in and they're literally looking for a diagnosis. They want it. They ask me for it. Don't you think I'm this? Don't you think I'm that? Sometimes they want that diagnosis so they can hold on to that and have reasons not to take ownership responsibility in their life. Other reasons is they say because they then want to tell mom and dad, I told you I had this, or tell their spouse, I told you I had this. So they have this extremeness that they're searching, hunting for this, which is really unhealthy relationship towards just psychology in general. To the other side of it, which is could be very freeing to hear, this makes sense. And now I know why things are occurring and happening. And so it really depends on what? Client personality, temperament. It depends on age, situation of the client. It depends on maturity level of them, as well as will this help? If so, how would it help?
On the actual diagnosis, right?
And
like you said, learning disabilities are important to know.
And lastly, of course, is the aspect of, understanding that what the diagnosis is would be helpful. And I would give one example would be like PTSD is a big one. I think in my practice where you have PTSD, when you really start looking at this and thinking in terms of how do we want to conquer and override PTSD? You have a trauma brain right now. There's certain therapies and treatments when you look at, let's talk about it.
This really helps, I think, with learning why you are diagnosed with something if you're in therapy and why a lot of times you're not. Therapists' jobs are to care, not cure. They are going to walk through with you because you're there for a reason, to either work out a situation, a behavior, a feeling, thoughts you're having. That's what we need to look at therapy for, is help me weather this, give me the coping skills, come alongside me, and let's push through this instead of please give me a diagnosis. So that really helped why we go to therapy and what psychological disorders are in general. So thanks, Joe. That helped a lot.